It's an interesting thing. I'm never quite sure why people allow journalists into their lives. I'm not sure I would be as open as most people I wrote about were with me. Most sort of reactions to the book have pointed out that these are weird ideas and quite weird people, but that they're sort of dealt with like real sensitivity and kind of and respect, I suppose, which has been, of all the reactions to the book, the one that's kind of most important to me. Some people think I'm taking the piss, and that's fine. I mean, there's funny stuff in the book. You can't avoid it. Like, there's a comic value to a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I think hopefully the people I've written about are sort of at least aware that they're being dealt with respect. They might not agree with everything I have to say, but I think, yeah, it's part of the job. My name is Mark O'Connell. I'm a journalist and essayist, and I've written a book called To Be a Machine, which is about a movement called Transhumanism, which is a movement predicated on the idea that we can and should use technology to change the basic facts of the human condition and to become ultimately immortal. I spent time with a guy called Randall Cohen, whose sort of life's work as a computational neuroscientist is to define the problem and hopefully find ways to solve the problem of converting human minds into code so that the code can be uploaded into machines so that we can kind of live immortally as robots. I spent time in Pittsburgh with a group called Grindhouse Wetware, who are sort of self-proclaimed cyborgs. They design and build technologies for inserting into their bodies, which give them sort of notionally at least superhuman capabilities, like the ability to sense magnetic north, or open your car door with a particular kind of gesture, or basically things that you could probably do with your smartphone. But the idea is that they want the sort of post-human future now, and they want to kind of take technology into themselves and transcend the body. So this is kind of a gesture towards that future. I hung out in a cryonics facility in Arizona and visited with the sort of recently dead and preserved transhumanists, and the idea is that they'll come back to life at some point when technology progresses to a degree of sophistication that will allow us to reanimate corpses. They don't call them corpses, they call them patients. But so that's the idea. What else did I do? I drove across Texas in a gigantic coffin-shaped bus with a guy called Zoltan Istvan, who was running for president of the United States in 2016 on a platform of, basically the need to invest in life extension science and become immortal. So that was interesting and fun and kind of wild. The ideas, first and foremost, were what fascinated me, but I wanted to sort of get to grips with the people who hold these ideas as well, because I found them quite distressing, this idea that we're just meat, that the human body is really just, the phrase that I use over and over again in the book, and that comes from this guy Hans Moravec, is that the human brain is a meat machine. So the idea that's kind of central to transhumanism is that we're already machines, but we're just machines that kind of run on meat. So there's this very kind of anti-human idea that's at the core of transhumanism. And yeah, I was sort of compelled by the disturbingness of it in a way, because if you're a transhumanist, the idea is that we are these bodies, we are these kind of animals, but it's just a sort of an accident of nature that we happen to be confined to these bodies, and that we can, in theory, and they would say in practice, we can extract ourselves from the substrate that we're run on, and we can run ourselves on anything. That, we can upload ourselves to robots, as I said, or we can become disembodied sort of consciousnesses in the cloud. And so again, in sort of common with a lot of religions, there is this kind of distaste for the body, for the flesh, and this idea that it's our destiny to transcend it and to become something other than the animals that we are. I'm not quite comfortable describing transhumanism as a religion. I don't think it is, but I think it comes from a similar place. I think it comes from this sort of basic inability to accept ourselves as humans, to accept, the sort of, in a way, irreconcilable reality of the fact that we're all going to die. And I think religion comes sort of grows out of that in a way. I'm obsessed with like the story of the fall. I'm not religious at all, but I've always been obsessed with those myths about how we got into this situation of being like dying animals. And I think a lot of art comes from that place as well. But I think transhumanism grows out of that sort of central human discomfort with ourselves as dying animals. I think it goes in a completely different direction, but I think it's motivated by those same sort of age-old fears that, you crop up in mythology from as early as Gilgamesh, the oldest story that there is really that we have. It just sucks that we have to die, and we deal with it in lots of interesting ways. Most of the book is sort of set in and around Silicon Valley in California generally. But so I kept having to go away and come back, and I did reporting in short bursts, and I would be immersed for sort of quite distinct periods of time in these ideas, like spending time with these people and just constantly being forced to confront the strangeness of thinking of a human as a machine. And then I would come home, and my son was sort of quite young when I started writing the book. He's only 4 now, but he was learning to walk during that time, and these ideas would kind of bleed in and out of my experience of my son developing and sort of learning to walk. And it was an interesting way, and in a way the only way that I could process these ideas was through my experience of just being a mammal and being a person, and just experiencing my son as a mammal. And so it kind of brought me back down to earth, and in a way became a kind of a productive sort of tension between the more sort of human and humane vision of human life and meaning, and the kind of very extreme sort of radically techno-rationalist ideas that I was dealing with. I was sort of aware when I was writing the book that there was all these kind of trends in what we would think of as mainstream culture that were reflecting sort of the very extreme kind of vision of human meaning that I was dealing with in transhumanism. Things like taking your life and converting it into data and seeing how long you sleep, those sort of running apps where you kind of measure your progress, and like just seeing yourself represented as information is an interesting kind of trend in contemporary culture. And the extreme version of that is transhumanism, where all we are is data, all we are is information. And it's there, I think, in like contemporary capitalism as well, this idea that what matters about us is not our lives as individuals, but our kind of the numbers that can be extracted from us, our data. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting sort of correspondences between transhumanism and actual sort of mainstream culture and capitalism. So I think part of what I'm doing with the book is finding a way to write about the way we live now by sort of presenting a very extreme extrapolation of it.